Hey everyone! Today, we're exploring the fascinating story of the Avars, a powerful and mysterious group from history that shaped the map of Europe in incredible ways. These people were a mix of various cultures, like the Rouran, Hephthalites, and Turkic Oghuric groups, who came together to form a confederation. Their journey began in Central Asia, but after the collapse of the Rouran Empire around 552 CE, they set out on a path that would lead them to the Pontic Steppe, an area that today includes parts of Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan. The Avars are often seen as the successors of the Huns, especially in their skills in mounted warfare. They didn't waste any time after settling in the region. They were quick to start expanding and conquering. Interestingly, they were even hired by the Byzantine Empire to take on rival tribes, and this led to an important alliance. Their leader, Bayani, teamed up with Alboin, the king of the Lombards, to defeat the Gepids in Pannonia, a region that's roughly where Hungary is today. This victory forced the Lombards to move to Italy and left the Avars in control of the area. With this conquest, the Avars established the Avar Khaganate, an empire that stretched across much of Central and Eastern Europe, covering parts of what are now Austria, Hungary, Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, and even parts of Turkey. Bayani expanded the empire quickly after the Lombards moved out of Pannonia in 568 CE, and this powerful state lasted until the Franks, led by Charlemagne, defeated the Avars in 796 CE. Now, about their origins, this is where things get a bit debated. Some historians link the Avars to the Rouran Khaganate, a nomadic empire in Mongolia north of China. When the Gokturks overthrew the Rouran in 552 CE, the Avars are thought to have fled west, escaping the new rulers. While not everyone agrees on this connection, it's a theory that makes a lot of sense. There's even mention of the Avars in Roman history as early as 463 CE, by a historian named Priscus. But it's unclear if these Avars were the same group or an earlier, unrelated confederation. What's fascinating is that the Avars were like political refugees when they arrived in Europe. They turned up at the court of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I in 558 CE, offering their military services. The Byzantines hired them to deal with tribal conflicts, and the Avars proved to be effective. However, when Justinian died and Justin II took over, things changed. Justin II canceled their agreement and refused to let them settle south of the Danube River. With no home and enemies on all sides, the Avars turned their attention to Pannonia. Some sources suggest they were even invited there by the Byzantine Empire to get rid of the Gepids. In 567 CE, Bayani joined forces with Alboin and the Lombards to destroy the Gepid kingdom. Before the battle, they agreed on an unusual deal. Bayani would take the land, wealth, and people of the Gepids, while the Lombards would simply live in peace. Why Alboin agreed to such a one-sided arrangement remains unclear, but it's possible Bayani gave him little choice. Together, their armies crushed the Gepids and defeated their king, Cunimund. Now, here's where history gets a bit gruesome. There are stories that Bayani turned Cunimund's skull into a drinking cup and presented it to Alboin as a gesture of camaraderie. Other accounts claim it was Alboin himself who did this, wearing the skull as part of his belt. Either way, the victory was decisive. However, when they marched on the Gepid capital, Sirmium, they found it heavily defended by Byzantine forces and had to retreat, unprepared for a prolonged siege. And the Avars, having solidified their control over Pannonia, began to establish what would become a powerful and formidable empire under the leadership of Bayani. While Sirmium remained beyond their grasp at the time, they had successfully pushed out the Lombards, who realized too late that their earlier alliance with the Avars was a grave mistake. Alboin, the Lombard king, attempted to counteract the growing Avar dominance by forging an alliance with the Gepids, even marrying Cunimund's daughter, Rosamund. But the Avars had grown far too strong, leaving Alboin with no choice but to lead his people into Italy in 568 CE, where he would later meet a tragic end. With the Lombards gone, Byzantine turned his focus toward building an empire that would define the region for decades. Despite the diverse ethnic composition of his forces, Byzantine demonstrated shrewd leadership and military strategy. A notable example of this was his willingness to send his subordinate Kutrugur warriors into dangerous campaigns, such as the invasion of Dalmatia, where any casualties would not directly weaken the core Avar forces. This ruthless pragmatism allowed the Avars to expand their influence rapidly across Pannonia and the surrounding regions. The Avars established their headquarters near the site of Attila the Hun's former capital, a symbolic nod to their claim as successors to the Huns. Known as the Ring, this fortified base became the nerve center of their operations. From here, Byzantine launched campaigns against the Franks, defeating King Sigebert in 570, and later targeted Byzantine territories, including Sirmium, which they finally captured around 582. For the Byzantines, the Avar conquest must have felt like a replay of the Hunnic invasions a century earlier. Byzantine's forces even pushed into the Balkans, demanding hefty tributes from the Eastern Roman Empire to maintain peace. When these payments fell short, the Avars rampaged across the region, operating with tactics eerily similar to those of the Huns. Their reliance on swift cavalry strikes, ambushes, and feigned retreats made them a terror on the battlefield. One of the key innovations that gave the Avars an edge in warfare was their use of the iron stirrup, which they introduced to Europe. This seemingly simple invention revolutionized cavalry tactics, allowing riders greater mobility and stability during combat. It made the Avar cavalry an even more formidable force, as they could deliver devastating charges and maintain balance while firing projectiles or wielding weapons. The Byzantine Emperor Maurice even noted in his military handbook, Strategicon, how relentless and unpredictable Avar tactics were, describing their refusal to relent until their enemies were utterly annihilated. During this period, the Byzantine Empire was embroiled in a war with the Sassanids, leaving its defenses stretched thin. Byzantine capitalized on this vulnerability, invading Byzantine territories with little resistance and exacting tribute. However, the tide began to turn in 592 CE, when the Byzantines concluded their conflict with the Sassanids. With renewed focus, the Emperor Maurice dispatched a stronger force under General Priscus, which succeeded in driving the Avars back into Pannonia. This near defeat might have spelled the end of the Avars, but internal strife in Constantinople, culminating in the rebellion of Phocas and the assassination of Maurice in 602, gave them a reprieve. Around the same time, a devastating plague swept through the Balkans, further destabilizing the region. It is believed that Byzantine succumbed to the disease, leaving the empire in the hands of his successor, whose leadership failed to match that of the charismatic founder. The new Khagan attempted to maintain the Avar Empire's dominance, but faced significant setbacks, including a disastrous campaign against Constantinople in 626, in alliance with the Sassanids. The Byzantine defenses, particularly the impregnable Theodosian walls, repelled the attack, and the Avar navy was crushed, forcing them to retreat. After the death of Byzantine's son in 630, internal conflicts began to weaken the once mighty empire. Revolts by subject peoples, such as the Bulgars, further fractured the Avar Khaganate. The Bulgars' rebellion, though ultimately unsuccessful, drained the Avars' resources and highlighted their waning power. By this time, the Avar economy had shifted from warfare and raids to agriculture, signaling a significant decline in their military might. Archaeological findings from this era show a noticeable reduction in weapons buried with male warriors, reflecting this transformation. When Charlemagne rose to power in 768, the Avars were no longer the fearsome force they had once been. Charlemagne's conquest of the Lombards in 774 cleared the path for him to focus on the Avar territories. Despite a brief delay caused by a Saxon revolt, Charlemagne's forces marched into Pannonia in 795, taking the ring and seizing the vast Avar treasure. The empire's collapse was sealed the following year, with its official surrender in 796. Although the Avars attempted a final revolt in 799, it was swiftly crushed, and by 803, their remnants were absorbed into other populations. While their empire had ended, the Avars left a lasting mark on history. They reshaped the demographics and political landscape of Central and Eastern Europe, displacing peoples and fostering the rise of new cultures and societies. Their legacy, much like that of the Huns, is one of both destruction and transformation.